Welcome to Mo's Market Pulse. I'm your host, Sara Mokaram, founder of Mo Digital Solutions, where we help businesses hit their revenue goals and thrive. On this podcast, we talk with industry leaders about their business, market trends, growth strategies, and what's ahead. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Anthony Jones, the CEO of Frontive. So, Tony, thanks for taking the time today to join us, and I'm super excited to have you here. Before we get into other topics, I always love to just set the stage with a bit of context for our listeners. Can you just share a bit about your journey into the healthcare tech and what led you to Frontive?
Thanks for having me today. I've been in healthcare for my entire career. I'm actually a doctor by education. So, finished medical school. Then, instead of doing a traditional residency, I ended up studying medical informatics. So, that was sort of my first journey into the technology side of healthcare. From then on, I moved over into industry and have worked at a number of companies, Deloitte Consulting, Reuters, Philips Healthcare, and ultimately just have always really gravitated toward not just the technology side of healthcare, but the part that really is closer to the information of healthcare, which is frankly an area that I think is so pivotal to the industry, but often gets overlooked, or certainly did get overlooked until we sort of got into this world of big data and certainly with AI. But it's really been somewhat of a passion of mine for most of my career. As far as Frontive itself, Frontive has been something that really has been percolating, I think, in my head for probably 15 years. Really focused on how do you just make it easier for people who are going through a complex health situation to navigate that situation? I think everybody either has gone through a surgery or something like that, or has a family member that's gone through it, and the experience is just difficult. You're going through the process. You're coming out of, either a day in the hospital or an outpatient procedure, and they're sort of pushing you out the door to free up room for the next person. And they're telling you everything you're supposed to do, don't do, expect, watch out for as the anesthesia is kind of wearing off. And you just realize we're putting patients in a very, very difficult position every time we do that. So our question was, how can you make that easier for the patient and frankly cheaper for the provider to provide that level of support that the patient wants and needs without it being so uh, difficult and frankly expensive by having nurses on call 24/7, or calling the patient 5 times before the day of surgery to let them know, hey, make sure and do this, make sure and do that, don't do this, don't do that. It seemed like a perfect setup for using technology. So that's how we arrived at Frontive.
Okay, great. And for those who may not be familiar with the platform, can you describe a little bit how it works and how it benefits both sides?
Yeah, sure. So, what we end up doing is working directly with the health system. So, we will take a particular part of surgery or a variety of surgeries that they do. We'll take the information that they traditionally will give to the patient and run it through a variety of our backend systems to convert that information into a couple of different things. One, a series of customized FAQs where we've got the question and the answer for that procedure for that patient. And then we also create what we call the Frontive daily health briefing. So that's more of, think of it like a project plan or a Gantt chart for that patient, for that procedure. So every day before the procedure, as they get closer to the day of the surgery, the content is changing. And same thing as they get on the other side. So it's always relative to the day of the procedure. So the thought being, how do you make it simple for somebody to just know on any given day, here's what I should expect, here's what I should do, here's what I should avoid. So we deliver all that through a mobile app, which is pretty much where patients expect all their information to come from anyway. We tie in directly to the health system's EHR to make sure we never get out of sync with what the doctor or surgeon is telling the patient they need to do. And so we start supporting the patient usually 2 to 3 weeks before the procedure, guide them all the way up to the day of surgery, and then once they come home, pick it up again from there, and usually cover them for another several weeks, depending on what the protocol is for that particular procedure.
I love that. I know just from experience as a patient side, I feel like we get those printouts, the paper printouts, and then it's trying to remember where I put that printout and reading through everything, which may not apply to this current day, right? It might be for post op or whatever it might be. So,
A lot of pressure on patients to sort of figure it out. And I think most patients do a reasonably good job of sort of figuring out what works for them. But is that really what we want them doing?
right, right. So, every startup has early struggle moments. Can you walk us through what those early days look like for you and your team? And what was harder than expected starting this
Yeah.
company?
Great question. I think everybody's journey is different. And so, I think there are a couple of things that come to mind. The first was just raising capital. I've been part of early stage companies before, but this is the first one where we were starting from scratch and having to raise that initial pre-seed capital. That was harder and took longer than we thought it would. Yeah, I think one of the things that propels you as an entrepreneur is you have a lot of passion around the idea, the product, whatever it is you're pushing forward. So it all makes perfect sense to you. You have all this clarity in your head, and you're like, as soon as I get in front of somebody and they hear it, they're going to have the same reaction to it that I do. And that's just not true. What you find is, the person you're talking to, certainly with an investor, they're coming to that conversation with their own ideas about how they're trying to, grow their capital. So trying to find that intersection is often tricky. So that was probably the biggest surprise that we had to go through. All that being said, I think we were still very fortunate that we did find good investors that synced up with us. So that part has gone well. The other part that I think was a bit of a surprise. I won't say it was a surprise because I've been in healthcare long enough, and you just know this about healthcare. Everything takes longer than you think it will. I mean, that's just the reality of healthcare, and partially because it's a regulated industry. So you're not just dealing with kind of your traditional market dynamics and competitors. You're dealing with the fact it is a regulated industry, and there's a threshold you have to meet in order to just play. So it's not a simple matter of, hey, I can create a minimal viable product. And yeah, it may be compliant with all the rules and regulations or not, but that doesn't matter. It matters. You have to be compliant day one. Otherwise, you don't get to play. So you really have to kind of build in enough runway to make sure you can do all those things before you ever get a chance to have your product used in a real world setting. So the other part is, the capital part, but then also how much runway do you need in order to just get into.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I want to take a step back here and look at the bigger picture that you're operating in, which I know you've touched on a little bit here. And so healthcare, it's definitely going through some shifts and both giving more opportunity as well as making it more difficult. So what are the biggest shifts that you're seeing in patient engagement or digital health delivery right now? And how are those shaping your strategy?
Yeah. Again, good question. Healthcare is extremely stressed right now, I think would be a good way to describe the industry. There was a lot of stress going on within healthcare before COVID. So it was already an industry that I would say was not the healthiest. COVID really put a tremendous strain on really every part of healthcare. And I think it did a very good job exposing weaknesses that have been there for a very, very long time and just really made it in some ways unavoidable to sort of look the other way or say we're going to put a band-aid on that and try to get around it. At the end of the day, I think the biggest problem that healthcare is just going through right now is the math just doesn't work. in a lot of situations where the cost of delivering care, the cost of supporting patients, the cost of the medications that we have developed, that pharma companies have developed and brought to market, are increasingly becoming unaffordable for more and more people. So you just have this incredible ecosystem of proceed, a lot of technology coming into it on the diagnostic side, on the therapy side, new drugs, just lots of new technologies, new digital health technologies coming in this environment that is just under a tremendous amount of stress from just the day-to-day cost and trying to manage that, trying to keep access available for people, in all different types of communities. So it is an entire ecosystem right now that I think is just going through a lot of stress, which you can look at one of two ways. You can either say that's a place where I don't want to operate because there's just too much volatility, or you look at it and say there's a tremendous amount of opportunity because things have to change. And so in that urgency to change, I think there's a lot of opportunity, and frankly, we think there's a lot of opportunity to bring in new technology that fundamentally starts to close some of these gaps that have been there for a long time, but have now gotten so wide that organizations are saying the same thing, is we can't keep doing it the way we've always done it. So we've got to look at digital tools and other types of technologies to do things that we've traditionally done with manual labor. So I think the biggest area is really when you just talk about, certainly the area we focus on, the cost of patient support around whether it's procedures or chronic conditions or whatever it might be. Those people just aren't there anymore. The healthcare system lost a tremendous number of very, very skilled nurses. Doctors are retiring at a clip in certain professions, and we're not backfilling them fast enough. So we're facing a provider crisis in several different areas. And yeah, I think that provides a tremendous opportunity for technology to come in if it's done correctly. And I think that's always the caveat in healthcare. You have to do things a certain way. Otherwise, you can cause a lot of damage if you go in with a lack of humility.
Yeah. And who in the field right now would you consider are relevant competitors or comparables to your company? And have you learned anything from watching them evolve in this space where you do feel like there is this room for technology to help?
There's always a lot of competition in different parts of healthcare. I don't want to call out specific companies to criticize them. What I will say is, I think for a while now, with the emergence of mobile devices, what you've seen a lot of companies gravitating toward is the chronic disease population. And probably because of just the size. When you start talking about people with diabetes, people with congestive heart failure, COPD, these are massive, massive populations. So it makes sense if you've got an app that or some kind of product that is designed to help someone manage congestive heart failure. It's logical that you're going to go, you're going to be attracted to that market because of the sheer size of it. Part of the challenge that I think a lot of companies face, and I think there's a lot of data to really back this up, and it kind of gets back to what you mentioned earlier. You asked about engagement. There's been a challenge trying to get engagement within the healthcare community among certain types of patients using digital tools. And so, really getting at the heart of your question, I think where a lot of companies have sort of gone down the route of we're going to chase the biggest market segment without fully understanding or bothering to really ask, why is it that those patients are where they are to begin with? So let's take something like congestive heart failure. A lot of people who have congestive heart failure and are managing it, you have a group of people who manage it perfectly well and don't need a lot of help. Then you have a massive population of people who don't manage it well and end up going back and forth to the emergency room at a tremendous cost to them and to the system. You have to ask the question, what is it they're not doing that's causing them to have these recurring episodes of fluid on their lungs that's causing them to go back into the ER? Then you have to dig even below that and say, do they not know what they're supposed to do? And the answer in a lot of situations is, especially when you're talking about chronic condition management, the patient knows what they're supposed to do. It's not a lack of understanding or clarity, or there's not confusion about it. There's something that's keeping them from doing it. In a lot of cases, with a lot of chronic conditions, it's they don't want to change their diet. They don't want to change their exercise pattern. That's not a technology problem. So, me giving them an app to remind them what they should and shouldn't eat, or shouldn't do, or how often they should exercise was never the problem to begin with. So, I think what you find is a lot of digital health apps out there that are well intentioned and very nicely developed, beautiful interfaces, but going after populations that don't need technology to solve their problem. What they lack is motivation, or in some cases, the medicine that they have to take makes them feel badly, so they don't take it. The app's not going to fix that. So, what we focus on and where we think we differentiate ourselves from a lot of the other companies that are out there just in related spaces is kind of doing your traditional market segmentation exercise up front and saying, okay, who are the patients out there who are motivated to do what they are supposed to do, but are struggling to do it because they're confused about what they're supposed to do. The instructions are complicated, so it's easy to think you're doing the right thing, but end up doing the wrong thing. So, just by starting with a population of people that are largely motivated, it is a smaller population to start with, but you're not trying to overcome that hurdle of no matter what you do, it's unlikely you're going to get them to engage and actually do what they need to do. So I think the decision we made is start there. And then from there, you can expand. But trying to start with a big population of unmotivated people is probably not going to work very well.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So, does your platform then take, say, the instructions that come from the doctors or medical offices and almost convert them into language that's more easily understandable for patients?
Yes, simply put, we definitely edit what we get. We then share that back with our customer, being the health system, to make sure they're okay with the edits that we make. One of the challenges that I think is, and we say this to our customers when we get to know them, or sometimes even in pitch meetings, but it's very hard for doctors and nurses who do a procedure or manage a situation regularly to unknow what they know. So when they're trying to explain that to someone who has no experience with that procedure, the gap is just too wide. So what the doctor or surgeon takes for granted, what the nurse takes for granted because they've been doing it for 15 or 20 years, to the patient, it's all new. And it's very hard to just get over that when that's what you do day in and day out. So part of what we do is just sort of come at it from, where is your average customer? Where are they coming from? And just don't make assumptions. So in a lot of cases, it's not that the language is poor or that, it's not written well. It's just there are a lot of assumptions made in those instructions for things that the patient really doesn't know. And what we're trying to keep that patient from having to do is go to other sources to try to fill in that knowledge, whether that be, going online and doing a search or asking a friend. We're trying to keep them from having to do that because the odds of them finding the right information is actually lower than you might expect.
I love that. Is there a trend or a development in the market that you feel is still being underestimated or could be a game changer in this field in the next couple years?
That's a really good question. AI is definitely not being underestimated. It may be overestimated.
Right.
Um, but when I think about other elements or other technologies that maybe aren't getting enough attention, nothing in particular sort of jumps out at me. The thing that I will go back to, though, that probably isn't getting enough attention and rarely gets enough attention is just the discipline around sort of growing a business. It's very easy to get distracted, and distracted is the word I want to use here, by the newest technology, the newest trend, the newest person or company that has something bold to say. The industry thrives on that. It's good, I think, to have that because it sparks imagination. But more often than not, there's a certain discipline that is just required to navigate through the normal steps of growing a business. And I think we don't put enough attention on having that discipline and making those choices early, specifically around just, a simple thing like your business strategy, your go-to-market strategy. I had somebody ask me on a recent call, as an early stage company, isn't it reasonable that you just have to throw a lot of things at the wall and find out what sticks? No, that is not what you're supposed to do. And I would argue that is probably a recipe for failure because you have a limited amount of capital, you have a limited amount of resources and with respect to the people in your company, and you definitely have a limited amount of time. And I would say of all three of those, the one that will kill you first is time. You are always in a battle with the clock. And so the thing you can't afford to do is try too many different things at the same time because you'll probably never know which one actually has the best potential or why one worked and one didn't. All that needs to happen early. Like you need to do the basics of really understand the problem that you're focused on, talk to potential customers to get insights from them. Doing that kind of work still matters. And then when you have really figured out what problem are we trying to solve, who are we trying to solve it for, then you can actually start thinking about what might a product or a service look like to address that problem. And it's boring to talk about because I think every panel, every conversation, somebody will mention just that whole part about understand the problem before you get to the product. But it's amazing to me how many companies and people continue to make that mistake. And I think that is how you end up with, a technology looking for a problem. I won't put AI in that category because I think AI is a different animal. However, the thing I will remind people is you've got a new technology that companies are spending an amazing amount of money on to put out there in the market. There are not a lot of examples yet of companies that have figured out how to monetize that. So, you see almost every app you use, almost every SaaS platform you use has thrown up a little AI button up there that you can use to, generate a picture. Apple has integrated it fully into their operating system now. But there is still a big open question over what are consumers willing to pay or what are companies willing to pay for that enhancement. And right now it's a very open question after a lot of money has been invested in putting that button on your screen.
Yeah, definitely. So this kind of transitions well, just with you touching on growth and go to market. I do now want to shift a little bit to growth. So every founder I've spoken to so far has expressed having to make some tough calls around their time, talent, and dollars, which you touched on a little bit. So when you look at the last 12 to 18 months or last couple years, what's been your go-to-market strategy and what channels or tactics have actually moved the needle forward?
Yeah. It's healthcare is a really, in some ways, it's like any other B2B type business. In other ways, it's very, very different. But for us, we're very clear on who we need to get to within a health system. We know the roles that those people are typically in most health systems. So it's going to be somebody in the C-suite, usually, or a head of a large surgical department. It's one of those two as sort of an initial entry point. Most decisions in health systems these days are very committee driven. So it's rarely that you're going to get to one person and that one person is going to be the buyer. There's going to be a series of stakeholders that you have to get to. So that is sort of a given for us. One of the advantages of being a little bit older as a founder is just I've got a history of being with very large companies where we sold a lot of products into a lot of these health systems. So we have a number of relationships with very, very senior people at a lot of different health systems. So we've been very fortunate that we've been able to leverage these relationships to get in at the right time for us, knowing sort of, hey, we're at our earliest stages. We need to go into a health system that is of a certain size. And we've been able to sort of move that way. That is not a scalable model. We're not under any illusion that, we can just continue to lean on those relationships. But I will tell you what we have found doesn't work terribly well, and that's trade shows. And I know it's and I'm not saying this to disparage all trade shows. For some companies and some go to market strategies, that is a perfectly good way to get in front of customers. For us, it's not. And largely because what we are selling requires more of a consultative discussion. And trade shows, at least the ones I've been to over the past few years, I think there are fewer and fewer buyers who actually come to those. And if they do come, they're being segregated or taken to lunch by somebody who's just spending a lot more money than we can afford to spend. So part of what, the question I think you got to ask yourself is if I'm going to a trade show as a startup company and right down from me in the same trade show hall is Microsoft, Google, you know, whomever, one of us probably is in the wrong place. So I think you really have to be savvy at just saying, you know, is the buyer that I'm looking for going to be here? And if they are, am I going to be able to get to them and get their attention? And if the answer is no, then I think you've got to find other ways and sort of go back to traditional, sort of your traditional sales and marketing tactics of be very smart about identifying who you're trying to reach and then, get warm introductions and things like that. And again, that is not our ultimate go to market strategy. But for where we are right now, one large health system customer uh, is sizable. These are very, very large entities and typically getting larger every year. So there are a finite number of customers that we have, unlike somebody who maybe is in, a B2C space where you're playing a very, very different game than what we're playing, or you're a B2B company and you still have, thousands and thousands of potential customers. Our list is a little more finite, so it's a little easier to manage. But you really think about how you go out and just get to those customers.
And so with the growth and, having these different plans and the targets that you're trying to go after, I'm sure there are obstacles that come up for you. And so what's one thing that you would say kind of keeps you up at night when you think about growing this business? Or what's the fear or risk that you keep circling back to?
Timing. I'd say the biggest risk and the thing that keeps me up at night is always the length of the sales cycle when you're dealing with these very, very large organizations. And it's not just because they're large. Part of the challenge that you're dealing with, again, I think anybody who works in a B2B space, you appreciate things just take a little bit longer because you're dealing with large organizations in a lot of cases. But again, going back to part of what we talked about earlier with healthcare, there's something unique about healthcare where almost everyone you're selling to, certainly on the clinical side, is a trained skeptic. That's part of what makes them good at what they do. And it's the doctor you want for yourself. You want somebody who's not easily influenced by the newest, greatest, biggest pitch. You want somebody who's a little bit skeptical before they say, yes, this is something I'm going to give to my patient. The challenge when that is your customer is you have to overcome that initial skepticism, and that adds time to what you're trying to do. So I would say, without a doubt, the thing that we're always trying to figure out is how do you shorten the sales cycle with these very, very large institutions where, again, you've got multiple stakeholders that you have to satisfy. So it's not just a matter of, oh, the head of surgery really likes what you're pitching, it's done. You still have to make sure the CIO is on board from a technical standpoint before they'll let you connect to the EHR. You are going to have an impact on nursing workflow. So the chief nursing officer probably needs to be on board, compliance needs to be on board. So you've got a host of stakeholders that you have to satisfy. And so that adds time. The other part that is a little tricky is we are clearly looking at how we use AI to do what we do better. And that opens a lot of doors because a lot of people in the industry clearly see AI as offering a lot of value and solving a lot of problems. You also have a situation where a lot of customers, I will say their appetite is a little bit further ahead of their readiness. So they like the concept of using AI in certain areas, but internally they have yet to even figure out what the governance looks like for bringing something in-house that they would then deploy to their patient population. So again, you've got to always manage just the length of the sales cycle given where healthcare is.
And has there ever been a moment where you felt like you were pouring energy into growth or a certain area and you just weren't getting traction? And what did you learn from that?
Kind of going back to what we talked about a little bit earlier, there is a line between being very clear and making choices about what you're going to do and what you're not going to do. But then there is a part where you do have to try different things. We tried a couple of different ways from sort of market outreach. There was a particular segment of healthcare that was not on our initial radar. And a few people approached us and said, have you thought about this segment as being a good one? And we were like, honestly, no, we hadn't looked at it. So we spent a little time, we took a look, we talked to a few people in it and came away going, yes, this actually is a very good segment for us. But then it became, how do you reach the decision makers in that segment, because it was an area where I personally didn't have a lot of relationships. Nobody within our company, our investors, our advisors really came from that area. So it was sort of going in cold. So you have to try some things. And one of the mistakes that I would say we made was we tried something that was, I would just say it made a lot of sense for the advertiser or the person who had this newsletter that was going out to that market. Our hesitance in doing it was we were sort of like, our product technically is a product, but as I said earlier, it requires a consultative sell. And so that format doesn't lend itself to a consultative pitch, but we tried it. We got nothing from it. But that's the nature of, I think moving into spaces that are, maybe less familiar. It wasn't horribly expensive to try it, but it did cost us something. I'd love to have that capital back right now, but that's, I think that's always going to be true. If you're not trying new things, there's a good chance you're probably not challenging yourself enough. You've got to be smart at how much you can afford to lose, because and you hear it all the time with gambling. You have to know your limit. And I think the same thing is true when you're building a business and you're trying to grow. You are going to try things that are unfamiliar. You're going to make bets because that is what you're partially being paid to do and to try. A lot of those are going to fail. You have to make sure none of them are fatal.
Thinking about the future now, and if we had to fast forward 12 months and everything has gone right for you, what would Frontive look like in terms of traction, reach, and team capacity?
Yeah. I think if I look out, I'm trying to make sure I don't say anything that's horribly inconsistent with what's in our investor deck, right? But I believe what I really sort of look out from a traction standpoint, a year, 12 to 18 months from now, I'd love for us to be up and running in somewhere from 4 to 6 large health systems. I think that is a reasonable goal. The one thing I know works in our favor is once you get sort of the first couple of large ones up and running and the results are good, things start moving much, much faster because nobody wants to be sort of one of two. We are in the process now of deploying at a couple of large health systems. So once those are up and running, I think the others will come faster, and I think they will be larger systems. From a team standpoint, I tend not to measure anything by sort of the size of the team. I've had a lot of luck throughout my career at getting a lot done with relatively small teams. I think there's just value in a very, very small group of very sharp people um, to just get things done and move quickly. I'm not against having a large team, but I don't tend to base success or failure on the head count. We tend to use a lot of consultants and contractors just because it gives us a lot of flexibility. So we can try something, and if it doesn't work, we can pull back, no harm done, as opposed to having to tell somebody, yeah, I know we hired you 3 months ago, but now we're going to let you go. But yeah, that's sort of what I look at is just number of installations and the size of the installations where we're up and running. I know just from experience, if you deliver value in healthcare and you're able to get your story out there from reputable institutions, the market will take care of you if you're doing it the right way. So I've seen that repeated over and over again. So I have to believe and I remain confident that if we do things the right way and the product proves itself in these environments, that the market will take care of us.
And just one more question that I like to ask at the end here is what advice would you give to other leaders who are navigating innovation in the healthcare space today?
Patience is critical. You just have to be patient because it does move at a pace that is unlike most other industries. And it does it for a reason. And it will frustrate you, it will keep you up at night, but you have to build that into your thinking. And I would say, maybe even more important than that, is you have to get investors who are also patient. If you get a group of investors who are looking for very, very fast turnaround, very short exit, you're probably going to end up having a difficult ride with those investors. So I think it's important to be realistic with yourself up front, but also be realistic with your investors and build in enough buffer within your projections to just make sure you give yourself enough time for things that you frankly just can't control within healthcare. And the timing is one of those things where it'll surprise you how long certain things take. But I think if you are relatively patient and you can get into an area where you can prove the product, it will accelerate. That's traditionally how things move in healthcare. But that's what I would tell any founder, anybody who's thinking about coming into healthcare with something new. It will take longer than you think.
That's really great advice and seems very applicable to this sector for sure. And so, if anyone wants to learn more about Frontive or connect with you, where is the best place?
Yeah, easiest thing to do is just send us an email at info@frontive.com, or if they want to reach out directly to me, you can do tony.jones@frontive.com. I will get back to you, or somebody on our team will get back to you immediately.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciated hearing all of your insights. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in to Mo's Market Pulse. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave us a comment, and join us again to hear more insights from future leaders. All right. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks.